said that you guys mistreated her.
How mistreated?
Well, that you called her names and you threatened to throw her out and make her homeless.
I try to help you guys because you need all the help, but every time that I want to save, it's not even enough for me to get the visa. I cannot save enough years. It's so hard for me.
The lie didn't fall apart slowly. It collapsed the moment Molly's heel hit the stone driveway and her eyes swept across the property. There was no slum, no rusting tin, no peeling paint or crying neighbors. What she saw was trimmed hedges, a polished gate, tile roofing, a perfectly placed welcome mat, and a swimming pool so blue it almost felt like a slap in the face. Forrest took a step back, maybe from the sun, maybe from the tension slicing through the air like a hot knife. Molly didn't say anything for a solid 10 seconds, but her silence was loud enough to shake Sheena's breath loose. The story Sheena had told, about being locked away, working like a mule, and handing over every peso to cruel parents who kept her trapped, started to shiver in real time. Because this house wasn't built by abusers. It was maintained by dignity. The kind of quiet pride that Sheena never mentioned. Forrest glanced at his mom's expression, hoping she'd mask it, soften it, fake politeness just long enough to get through the gate. But Molly was already scanning, already filing details away like she was building a case. And Sheena, standing beside them, trying to smile, could feel her body unraveling one breath at a time. She tried to guide them toward the door like everything was fine, like her palms weren't sweating through her dress. But Molly wasn't looking at the house. She was looking through it. Through Sheena. Through Forrest. Through the past year of texts, tears, and money sent in sympathy. Because once upon a time, Sheena had said she had nowhere safe to go. That she was saving for her visa because her parents took everything, that her only chance at freedom was Forrest. The air was thick with heat, but it was the cold suspicion in Molly's voice when she finally spoke that froze everyone. This is where they live? Just 5 words, but it was already starting. Sheena's body flinched like it expected the interrogation to begin on the porch. Forrest cleared his throat, tried to say something reassuring, but the weight of his mom's disbelief was already dragging the moment down. Inside, the house smelled of something clean and respectful. Polished wood, sweet rice, air conditioning humming like it had something to prove. Sheena's parents weren't visible yet, but their fingerprints were everywhere, in the care, the order, the love of presentation. That wasn't how abuse usually decorated a home. Forrest could feel the cracks forming, one memory at a time. When Sheena cried on video, when she said her parents left her hungry, when she begged him not to tell Molly too much, he thought he was protecting her. But now he wasn't sure from what. Molly ran her fingers across a cabinet as if checking for dust. But it wasn't dust she wanted to find. It was deception. This wasn't the slum she was promised. And that meant someone had lied. Sheena laughed nervously and started describing how the tiles were old, how the water pump breaks, how looks can be deceiving. But every word felt thinner than the last, because nothing around her was backing up her story. The pool glistened, the landscaping whispered, and Molly was already loading her questions like bullets in a clip. They hadn't even sat down yet, and already the truth was gasping for air. Forrest kept trying to move the conversation forward, tossing in half smiles, soft jokes, awkward compliments about the plants, anything to deflect what was already simmering beneath his mother's calm exterior. But it was useless. Because Molly wasn't here to make memories, she was here to make. Sense of what she believed was a manipulation that had gone unchecked for far too long. She didn't care about the food, or the warm light pouring through the windows, or the quiet hospitality that blanketed the room. She was watching Sheena like a hawk tracking something dishonest, scanning every gesture, every hesitation, every glance toward the floor. Forrest noticed it, but he didn't stop her. Because deep down, He had questions too, ones he didn't want to ask himself. Questions that had been quietly gnawing at him for months, but now refused to stay buried. Sheena's voice had once made him feel needed. She told him things that made him feel heroic. She was the girl trapped behind cultural bars, under the thumb of parents who drained her paycheck and crushed her independence. She said she was saving every cent for the visa, hiding money in corners, sneaking to call him from the back of a market where she worked long hours and got nothing in return. He believed her. Who wouldn't? She cried. She whispered. She asked him not to tell anyone, because she feared punishment. But now he was sitting in a house where the air conditioning worked better than his own apartment back in the States, where the floor shone like someone cared, where nothing screamed poverty except the narrative she had sold them. And Molly didn't need proof. She just needed contrast. The disconnect was proof enough. Sheena tried to steer the conversation to safe ground, asking if they'd like to sit, offering water, complimenting Molly's earrings, as if that could soften the interrogation she felt coming. But Molly wasn't interested in small talk. Her kindness had a shelf life. And it was about to expire. Her eyes landed on Sheena's dad, who had just entered the room, smiling, open, unaware that his presence was about to be pulled into something darker. Forrest shook his head slightly, silently begging his mom to tread lightly. But that was never going to happen. Molly waited until Sheena excused herself to the kitchen, then leaned forward, hands folded neatly in her lap, her voice calm, too calm. Sheena told us, she began, each word heavy with precision, that you took all her earnings, every check, every cent she made. The room went silent. The father froze mid-motion. Forrest stopped breathing. No one reached for their drink, and in that moment, the floor of the story Sheena had built began to cave in beneath them. What Molly said next didn't just break the room. It shattered Sheena's entire narrative. The dining table looked like it belonged to a celebration, not a confrontation. A traditional Filipino boodle fight, carefully arranged on banana leaves, steamed rice stacked like gentle hills, grilled seafood shimmering under warm light, plates of tropical fruit sliced with intention. Sheena's family had poured everything into this welcome. Not to impress, but to connect. Her sister placed the last bowl of dipping sauce near Molly's seat with a soft smile, and for a brief, flickering moment, it almost felt like peace was possible. Forrest leaned back and tried to breathe normally. Even Molly seemed to pause, taking in the effort, nodding slightly as if to say, "This is nice." Sheena looked hopeful, but behind her polite smile, her entire body was bracing for impact, because she knew the silence was too calm, the warmth too temporary, the truth too fragile. They all sat, hands hovering above the food, laughter beginning to stir, and for a second, Sheena dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the tension from earlier had been left at the door. But Molly didn't eat. She picked at her food as if waiting for a cue, her fork tracing invisible patterns on her plate. Then, without raising her voice, without changing her posture, she fired the first shot. So, she said, eyes still on her untouched rice, Sheena told us her parents used to threaten her. Take her paychecks. Keep her trapped. The words floated out like smoke, soft, slow, but deadly. The effect was immediate. Forks froze mid-air. Forrest looked up like he'd been hit with a glass of cold water. Sheena's sister blinked. Her father stiffened. And Sheena's face lost all color. Nobody responded right away. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. Sheena didn't speak. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Molly's expression. Too polite, too calm, too sharp. Her father turned toward her, confused, brows drawn together as if trying to understand how this version of events had ever been allowed to take root. Molly continued, still quiet, but each word now trimmed to the bone. She said if she didn't hand over her money, you'd make her homeless. Is that true? The way Sheena's father looked at her in that moment wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. Not theatrical. Not explosive. Just this heavy, quiet collapse. A man blindsided by a story he'd never known he was in. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out at first. Then finally, softly, we never took from her. She helped. Yes, but we never threatened. His voice cracked, not from defensiveness, but from shock. The silence around the table was now thick with betrayal, confusion, and humiliation. And the scariest part? Molly still hadn't raised her voice, but she had already cracked the room in half. Sheena's eyes darted from her father's face to Molly's still fork, then back to Forrest's frozen expression, and her lips trembled before any sound escaped. The silence wasn't waiting for her anymore. It was choking her. And then it came. Not words at first, but a cracked breath, followed by the kind of crying that sounds like panic disguised as apology. Her whole body folded inward as she mumbled through her tears, "I wasn't trying to lie. I didn't know how to say I couldn't afford everything. I tried to help. I did. But the visa, it's too much. I didn't want to ask for more." Her voice shattered mid-sentence. She reached for Forrest's hand, but he didn't move. Not toward her. Not away. He just sat there, still, calculating, watching her fall apart like a scene he'd seen before, but never this close. Her father didn't speak again right away. His face had shifted into something unreadable, like he was trying to understand not what was said, but why it had been necessary to say it. Why would his daughter paint them as villains to people halfway around the world? Sheena kept sobbing, trying to explain without really saying anything at all. "It's so hard. I wanted to save. I wanted to come. I thought if I made it sound like I had nothing, they'd understand why I needed help." It wasn't a confession. It was survival language. And yet, the room wasn't processing survival. It was processing betrayal. Her sister stared across the table in stunned disbelief. "You told them we were abusing you?" Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The grief in it was sharper than Molly's words ever were. But Sheena couldn't answer. Not in a way that made sense. Not in a way that could undo what was already out there. Forrest finally broke his silence. Not with comfort, not with defense, but with numbers. "So," he said, his tone tight, "how long would it take for you guys to pay her back? Like, if she needed it now? For the visa?" That question wasn't just tone deaf. It was bloodless. The kind of remark that exposes exactly how little someone understands about what's really happening. He'd waited until the air was thick with humiliation to ask about cash. Sheena's sister blinked in disbelief. "You're asking for her money back? Right now?" Forrest didn't flinch. "She needs it. We can't move forward if that's missing." The words dropped like rocks on a dinner table that used to smell like hospitality and now reeked of quiet shame. Her father nodded slowly, still stunned. "If she wants to stop giving, that's okay. Always okay. And if she needs it back, we'll go through what we have and try." His voice was soft, but beneath it, pain hummed like an old wound reopened in front of strangers. He hadn't raised his voice either. Nobody had. And still, everything felt like it was cracking at the corners. What happens when survival instincts look like betrayal? This is where things spiral. Sheena's apology wasn't graceful. It didn't come wrapped in a perfectly worded explanation or a well-rehearsed defense. It spilled out raw, messy, and frantic. The kind of apology that tries to do everything at once: explain, regret, beg, defend, surrender. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was scared. I didn't think you'd understand if I said it honestly. I know it was wrong. I'm so sorry. Her voice kept breaking between syllables, her body shaking from the kind of shame that can't be staged. And for a second, Forrest looked like he might soften. His hand moved slightly toward hers on the table. He nodded. Not fully, but enough. Okay, he said. That's all I wanted. The truth. But Molly didn't nod. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her expression was made of stone. You call this truth? She asked flatly, not raising her voice, not needing to. This is what you say now because you got caught. Forrest glanced toward his mom, unsure if this was the moment to pull her back, but the moment had already passed. Molly was locked in. I'm not buying it, she continued. You said those things about your parents for a reason. You used them to build a whole story. You made my son feel sorry for you. You had him defending you, hiding things from me. That doesn't go away because you cried over rice. Sheena looked down. Her shoulders slumped. The apology had already dissolved in her throat. She had nothing left to offer, nothing else to say that wouldn't sound like more performance. Her father had forgiven her. Her sister had gone quiet, no longer speaking, but no longer angry. Forrest had chosen to accept what she said. But Molly was unmoved. Not because she didn't hear it, but because she didn't want to. You think this is over? Molly asked, still looking directly at Sheena. You think we're done finding things out? It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Forrest stayed silent, unsure which side of the line he was supposed to stand on. He had told Sheena he was tired of the lies, but now that they were out, he didn't know what to do with the pieces. He kept reaching for peace, but every time Molly spoke, the table shifted again. Sheena wasn't forgiven. She was tolerated. She wasn't believed. She was being watched. It wasn't about repairing trust. It was about reasserting who held it to begin with. Sheena nodded slowly, eyes still low, lips tight. I won't lie again, she said softly. But even as she said it, it sounded like a contract signed under duress. Because her promise meant nothing. The damage wasn't in what she did. It was in the story that everyone else now believed about her. No matter what she said next, someone would be looking for the next lie. Even truth now would sound suspicious. Even honesty wasn't enough to clear her name. So what happens now? Sheena hadn't built a lie for the thrill of it, or because she enjoyed control, or because she saw some grand reward at the end. She built it like someone bracing a cracked dam with whatever tools were within reach. Fear, guilt, sacrifice, silence. She used them all like sandbags. Because every time she got close to losing Forrest, she heard that voice in her head telling her that love only survives if you earn it every single day. And in her world, that meant looking fragile, not demanding, not selfish, not complicated. She knew he was helping with money. She knew Molly was skeptical from day one. She also knew what kind of woman they both believed was worth saving. And it wasn't a strong one. It wasn't someone who could provide for her family and smile while doing it. It was someone who needed rescuing. And so she gave them that version of herself. Not because she wanted to manipulate, but because she was terrified of what would happen if she didn't. Helping her parents wasn't the problem. Being seen as someone who could afford to help, that was the risk. Because that's when people start asking questions about who really needs who. That's when financial generosity becomes evidence that maybe she isn't desperate enough. So Sheena did what many immigrant women do without even realizing it. She started performing struggle. Not fake tears or elaborate scams, but small, constant self-reductions. Downplaying what she had. Hiding what she gave. Pretending she needed more than she did, not out of greed, but to stay safe in a relationship built on uneven power. When she told Forrest that her parents took everything, what she was really saying was, don't expect me to give you anything yet, because I have nothing left. When she told Molly she was trying her best, what she meant was, please don't look too closely, because you'll find things that make you walk away. And when she cried that night, after the first video call, it wasn't fake. It was exhaustion, because being the girlfriend, the visa applicant, the cultural ambassador, the emotional translator, the future daughter-in-law, it all took energy. It took performance. And no one ever saw that labor. They only saw what was missing from their version of the story. Sheena wasn't hiding money. She was hiding how much pressure she was under to be perfect, to never offend, to never seem too strong or too secure. Because in this dynamic, power isn't given. It's borrowed. And the cost of keeping it is pretending you never had any to begin with. Forrest sat on the edge of the guest bed that wasn't his, in a country he hadn't explored, inside a home he didn't help build, and still felt entitled to ask Sheena how much more she was hiding. The irony didn't even register on his face. He had no income, no plan, no role in this house outside of being the foreign fiance with the emotional receipts. Yet somehow, he had positioned himself as the one owed honesty, owed repayment, owed proof of commitment. Sheena stood in front of him, already drained, already hollow from the dinner table wreckage, and now facing another interrogation that didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed. The worst kind. The kind that forces you to apologize for breathing. What made it worse was that Forrest wasn't yelling. He was speaking softly, like a counselor, like someone trying to process things. But every word he used carried an edge that cut deeper than yelling ever could. "I just need to know you're not going to surprise me again," he said. "I don't care about the money. I care about the trust." Sheena bit the inside of her cheek, because what trust had he offered? The last year of their relationship had been built on conditions, on updates, on panic when she didn't text back within an hour. Trust didn't flow both ways. It flowed in one direction, toward him, monitored by him, judged by his mother. Molly had already staked her claim. She wasn't just an observer. She was a shadow in every room, a presence that reshaped how Sheena dressed, what she said when she spoke. Sheena didn't agree to these boundaries. She didn't ask for surveillance. But it came anyway, dressed in phrases like, "We're just concerned, and we want the best for Forrest." The subtext was clear. Prove you deserve him. Prove your story checks out. Prove you're not dangerous to the delicate balance of white American comfort. And if you flinch, if you stumble, if you ever seem like you're more capable than helpless, they'll pull back their version of love so fast, you won't have time to explain. Sheena wasn't the manipulator here. She was the mirror. And what they saw in her made them uncomfortable. A woman who could be gentle and also strategic. A woman who could help her family and still dream of marriage. A woman who didn't collapse in gratitude every time someone threw her a bone. Forrest didn't see her. He saw the story he wanted to believe, that he had saved her from something. And when that story cracked, so did his pride. You don't need to steal to get punished. Sometimes, not suffering enough is the real crime. Sheena stood at the sink, her hands submerged in water that had long gone cold, staring blankly at a plate she'd already scrubbed twice. The house was quiet now. Molly had gone back to the guest room. Forrest was scrolling through his phone on the couch like nothing nuclear had happened. And her parents were pretending to be fine, even though her father hadn't touched his dessert, and her sister hadn't spoken since the moment Forrest asked about repayment. The meal meant to bridge cultures had turned into a ceremony of shame, and now the silence afterward felt like a punishment no one had the courage to name. Forrest thought everything was resolved. That's how he framed it, at least. "We got through it," he said, while helping her clear the table, as if surviving humiliation in front of your family counted as a milestone. He wore the expression of a man who believed he'd handled something hard with grace, never noticing that the woman next to him hadn't breathed freely in hours. He had no idea what it cost her to keep nodding, to keep saying sorry, to keep standing. Sheena had already apologized. She'd already explained, but now there was a new unspoken expectation. That she'd also rebuild the emotional balance she had supposedly shattered. That she'd make everyone else feel okay about what had happened, even if it meant continuing to twist herself into something smaller and more palatable. Her parents were trying to save face. Her father smiled too much now. Her sister offered tea in a voice that sounded rehearsed. They weren't angry at Sheena. They were embarrassed. Not because of the money, but because of the way they'd been framed in front of strangers who now saw them as characters in someone else's guilt-ridden screenplay. Sheena had dragged them into a narrative meant to protect her relationship, and it had backfired so completely that the only option left was to pretend none of it had happened. Forrest never apologized to them. Not once. He didn't acknowledge how invasive his questions were. He didn't notice the way Sheena's father clenched his jaw when Molly implied they were living off their daughter. Instead, Forrest acted like he'd defended Sheena's right to transparency. Like he'd solved a problem with logic instead of deepening the wound with entitlement. He thought he'd shown maturity. He thought he'd proven he could handle conflict. But the truth was, Sheena was the one who paid the price for everyone's version of resolution. And now she was expected to move forward, to smile more, to thank Molly for hearing her out, to keep reassuring Forrest that nothing else was hidden. She had been stripped of dignity in her own home, in her own language, in front of the people she used to feel safe around. And yet, somehow, the pressure to keep this relationship alive still fell on her. The burden to glue back what others broke. She might not leave the relationship, but a part of her has already checked out. Back home, Molly had the floor. Every call, every conversation, every passive-aggressive anecdote became her stage. And Sheena's name came up like a cautionary tale disguised as concern. She didn't shout. She didn't smear. She simply shared the story as if she were the wronged party who'd just tried to protect her son from being taken advantage of. I went there with an open heart, she'd say, hands over her chest. The performance barely masked, but it's like, how many lies do you let slide before you start asking what else is being hidden? And just like that, Sheena became the girl who lied. Not the girl trying to help her family. Not the woman carrying the emotional labor of two countries on her back. Not even the woman who apologized, who owned it, who stayed. No, just the liar. Forrest didn't push back on his mom's version. He didn't clarify or correct or challenge her when she recounted the dinner story like it was some kind of intervention that saved his future. He didn't tell their friends that Sheena had broken down twice in the same day, that she had been honest if not from the beginning, then at least by the end. Because Forrest wasn't trying to rewrite anything. He was trying to preserve peace. And peace in this case meant silence. So he nodded when Molly explained how sad it was that they'd been misled. He nodded when his friends said they were lucky he found out before the wedding. He nodded because it was easier than saying, "She's not what you think, but neither am I." Sheena, meanwhile, wasn't there to defend herself. Her story didn't travel with the same credibility. Her voice didn't sound the same through someone else's mouth. Her nuance, her fear, her panic, her exhaustion, none of it fit into the version that Molly retold. Because Molly had one thing Sheena didn't: social capital. Sheena had to earn belief. Molly inherited it. Is it a lie to tell only the part of the story where you were uncomfortable and skip the part where you caused the discomfort? Is it a lie to present yourself as a hero for calling out deception, but forget to mention how you weaponize someone's culture to do it? No one asked Sheena if she had more to say. They had already decided she'd said too much. And now her identity was built on a single moment of panic rather than the years of quiet sacrifice that led her there. You don't lose trust because you lied. You lose it because someone decided you don't deserve forgiveness. Sheena didn't cry this time. Not when Forrest said he was willing to move forward. Not when he said he believed her now. Not even when he reached for her hand and promised they could start fresh, because there was nothing left to release. The tears had already been spent. What remained was a quiet calculation. Not cold, not detached, but stripped of illusion. She nodded at the right time. She agreed to the second chance he offered, as if it was a gift and not a transaction. She kept her voice calm. She didn't challenge Molly's silence across the table. She knew this wasn't reconciliation. This was a pivot, a reframing of control, disguised as healing. The lie wasn't forgiven. It was leveraged. Now every word would be tracked. Every delay met with suspicion. Every request second-guessed. Not because she deserved to be punished, but because now there was precedent. Forrest would never say it out loud, but Sheena knew the next time she said "I'm fine," he'd wonder what she wasn't saying. When she smiled during a phone call with her sister, he'd think about the money again. When she asked for space, he'd interpret it as hiding. She wasn't being trusted. She was being monitored. Politely, with a kind of performative patience that always ended in, "I just want honesty this time." Molly hadn't spoken since the day Sheena apologized. She'd watched. She'd lingered. She'd been present in all the polite ways that look supportive to outsiders but feel suffocating to the person on the inside. She didn't bring up the dinner. She didn't revisit the accusations. She didn't attack. She didn't need to. Her silence now held more power than her voice ever had. It said, "I'm still watching you." It said, "I don't believe this is over." It said, "You've been warned." And Sheena, who once feared being disbelieved, now feared something worse, being tolerated with quiet suspicion forever. She promised not to lie again. But the rules had already shifted. Her honesty now came with disclaimers. Her emotions had to be curated. Her family had to stay in the background. Her independence had to shrink into something that made Forrest feel like the one still protecting her. And that was the real price of peace. Not compromise. Not rebuilding trust. Control, recalibrated. Emotional debts, restructured. The relationship survived, but only on terms that would make her disappear slowly if she wasn't careful. Forrest smiled more now. He felt proud for giving her a second chance. He told friends they'd work through it. He believed it. Maybe. But deep down, Sheena knew what had actually been negotiated. Not safety. Not equality. Permission. The right to stay. Under supervision. But if you think Sheena's done being tested, wait until the visa interview. That's when everything breaks.